I'm sitting in my car in the parking garage of Riverside Tech, and my hands are literally shaking on the steering wheel. It's 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, and I'm holding the termination letter that officially ends the career I built for 6 years. The letter is crisp white paper with the company logo embossed at the top, and right there in black and white it says, "Termination effective immediately due to performance issues." But here's the thing, I've been struggling with depression for 8 months, and my boss, Miranda Thompson, knows it. She knows because I was transparent with her. I told her about my diagnosis, my medication changes, the sleepless nights, the fact that I was barely holding on. I thought my vulnerability would build trust, that it would make her understand why some days I needed to work from home, why I wasn't always the bright-eyed, bubbly employee who could bounce back from anything. I was wrong. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this wasn't just about my depression. This was about Miranda's lies. This was about company policies that existed on paper but were selectively enforced. This was about a boss who preached mental health awareness to her daughter's friends, but destroyed the career of a woman who dared to struggle with her own mental health. By the time I'm done with this story, Riverside Tech won't exist anymore. Miranda will have lost her $50 million company, her reputation, and her ability to ever again look another employee in the eye and pretend she cares about their well-being. And I'll be sitting on a beach in Costa Rica, watching my own consulting firm grow, knowing that sometimes justice isn't a myth. But it starts with this parking garage, with these shaking hands, and with a letter that should have been my defeat. Instead, it became my invitation to war. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or punished for simply being human, this one's for you. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and get ready for a revenge so sweet, so perfectly orchestrated, that you'll wonder why Miranda Thompson thought she could get away with what she did. If you've ever dreamed of serving justice to someone who wronged you, really wronged you, make sure to hit that like button because this story will give you chills. And subscribe for more real revenge stories that prove karma doesn't miss. We're just getting started, and by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how a woman who believed she was untouchable learned that there's always someone watching, always someone recording, and always someone willing to fight back. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 months ago, I was the Senior Marketing Director at Riverside Tech, a software company specializing in workplace productivity applications. Miranda Thompson was my boss, the Vice President of Marketing, and 6 months ago, I would have called her my mentor. I would have trusted her with my life. Let me tell you what Riverside Tech looked like from the inside. The office was all gleaming glass and open floor plans, with inspirational quotes about disruption and innovation painted on the walls in trendy fonts. We had kombucha on tap, standing desks, and a meditation room that Miranda frequently used for photo ops with visiting clients. The company culture was all about work-life balance and mental health awareness. Miranda herself gave speeches at conferences about the importance of supporting employees through difficult times. At least that's what she said in public. In private, Riverside Tech was a pressure cooker dressed up in Silicon Valley mythology. Miranda believed in crushing goals and hustle culture, and she had a habit of scheduling mandatory 7 a.m. meetings that somehow always lasted until noon. She'd send emails at midnight and expect responses within the hour, then praise employees who showed such dedication. She had favourites, the people who could survive on 4 hours of sleep and never seemed to struggle with anything, and then she had everyone else. I was different from her favourites. I was 34 years old, divorced, and raising my 12-year-old daughter Emma alone. I didn't have the luxury of living in a downtown loft with a gym membership and a personal trainer. I had morning routines that involved making sure Emma got on the school bus, evening routines that involved homework help and bedtime stories, and weekends that involved grocery shopping and laundry and trying to be a present parent in the limited time we had together. This made me valuable to Riverside Tech. I was efficient, I was strategic, I could manage a team, execute campaigns, and drive revenue while still being home for dinner 3 nights a week. Miranda had promoted me twice in 3 years, and when she needed to impress clients, she'd point to my work and say, "This is what excellence looks like." Then, in July 2024, my father died. The grief hit me like a freight train. My father and I were close. He was the one who taught me to code, who encouraged me to start my career in tech, who believed in me when I started as a junior analyst with 0 confidence. Losing him didn't just break my heart, it shattered my sense of the world being a safe and predictable place. I asked Miranda for 2 weeks off to handle the funeral and get my feet under me. She was understanding, sympathetic, and said all the right things. "Take all the time you need," she told me. "Family comes first. We'll handle everything here." I came back after 10 days, thinking I was ready. But grief doesn't work on a timeline. Some mornings I couldn't get out of bed. Some afternoons I'd find myself staring at my computer screen, unable to remember why any of this mattered. I was exhausted all the time, even after sleeping 10 hours. I forgot appointments. I missed deadlines. I made mistakes I never would have made before. The worst part was that I could feel myself becoming unreliable, and it terrified me. I was a single mother. I couldn't afford to lose this job, but I also couldn't seem to shake this fog that had settled over my brain. Dr. Williams, my GP, diagnosed me with depression related to complicated grief. She prescribed medication and referred me to a therapist. She also recommended that I consider taking a medical leave to focus on my treatment. Miranda was sympathetic when I told her about the diagnosis. "This happens to everyone," she said, using that voice she reserved for dealing with difficult situations. "The important thing is that you're getting help. Let me know if you need any adjustments to your schedule." That's when I made my first mistake. I told Miranda about the medical leave option. "Really?" she said, leaning back in her chair. "That's a big step. Are you sure that's necessary?" "Dr. Williams thinks it would help me get back to full productivity faster," I explained. Miranda nodded slowly. "I understand, but I have to be honest with you, Sarah. The leave policy here is complicated. We have to consider business needs, and with the Morrison campaign launching next month, we can't really spare you right now." I should have pushed harder. I should have insisted. But Miranda was right. The Morrison campaign was crucial, and I was the only person who understood the client. Instead, I agreed to work from home 3 days a week and cut back my hours. It wasn't enough. If anything, the reduction in structure made things worse. Working from home meant I had to find childcare on the days I came in, which meant extra expenses. It meant I was constantly on call for Emma's school nurse calls and behaviour issues. It meant I couldn't concentrate because there were always dishes to wash, laundry to fold, a house to maintain. By October, I was a mess. I'd gained 20 pounds from stress eating. My hair was falling out. I was having panic attacks in the bathroom at work. And Miranda was watching it all with increasingly cold eyes. The performance review meeting was scheduled for November 15th. I knew it was going to be difficult. I'd been missing targets, making errors, and generally not performing at the level Miranda expected. But I thought we could work through it. I thought this was what performance reviews were for, identifying problems and creating solutions. I was wrong. "I need to be completely honest with you, Sarah," Miranda said, not looking up from the laptop between us. "Your performance over the past 6 months has been concerning." She clicked through a series of slides showing my declining metrics, missed deadlines, campaign results below target, employee feedback scores that had dropped. Everything was there in neat little graphs and bullet points. "I understand this has been a difficult period for you," Miranda continued, "and I want to be supportive, but performance is performance, and I need to see improvement. If things don't turn around by the end of the year, we're going to have a different conversation." "What kind of different conversation?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Miranda closed her laptop and looked at me directly. "I think you know what kind, Sarah. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I need you to step it up. The old Sarah, the one who drove those Morrison numbers, who managed her team so effectively, who was my go-to person for everything, she needs to come back." What Miranda didn't say, but what was clear from the tone of her voice and the set of her jaw, was this: "Your depression is making you weak, and weakness isn't tolerated here." I nodded and promised to do better. That night, I called Dr. Williams and asked about increasing my medication dosage. I started therapy twice a week instead of once. I hired a nanny to help with Emma on my office days. I was determined to get my life back. But some things aren't that simple. Depression isn't a light switch you can turn off when someone else needs you to be functional. It's more like trying to drive a car through fog. You're moving forward, but you can't see where you're going, and every turn feels dangerous. December was worse. The holiday season was supposed to be my time to shine, the season when my marketing campaigns really showed their worth. Instead, I missed the Morrison campaign kickoff meeting because I couldn't get out of bed. I sent a team member to present my work, and according to Miranda, it wasn't the same. I started getting emails from HR about my attendance. I started getting copied on performance improvement plans that I didn't remember agreeing to. Most terrifying of all, I started getting whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. January 3rd, 2025. That date is burned into my memory because it's the day I officially became that problem employee. I'd called in sick on December 23rd because I had a severe anxiety attack and Emma was scared and needed her mom. I'd missed 3 days of work total that month, but in Miranda's world, that made me unreliable. The final straw was apparently that I didn't respond to her email about the Morrison campaign while I was hospitalized for a week after a suicide attempt on New Year's Eve. The attempt was related to a lot of things: the death of my father, the divorce, the depression, the pressure to perform at work while falling apart at home. But in Miranda's version of events, it was just another example of my unpredictability affecting the business. When I came back from the hospital on January 2nd, Miranda called me into her office immediately. "Sarah, we need to talk about your position here," she said without preamble. "Your absence over the holidays caused significant disruption to the Morrison account. We lost the client. We lost Morrison because I was in the hospital. We lost Morrison because you weren't available when they needed you. That's the reality of business, Sarah. Companies can't rely on employees who can't be reliable." I stared at her, trying to process this. Morrison had been a $2.3 million account. It was a significant part of our quarterly numbers. And in Miranda's mind, losing it was somehow my fault for having a medical emergency. "Miranda, I was in the hospital for a suicide attempt. That's not something I can control." And I understand that. I really do. But I also have a business to run and clients to keep happy. The fact remains that when Morrison needed marketing support, you weren't available to provide it. You could have assigned someone else to cover for me. You could have rescheduled the meeting. I could have done a lot of things, but I didn't, and now the client is gone. The question now is what we do about your future here at Riverside Tech. What Miranda meant by "we do about your future" became clear 2 weeks later. I was fired for performance issues and inability to meet the requirements of the position. The termination letter cited 6 months of declining performance, missed deadlines, and failure to maintain professional standards. It didn't mention the Morrison account. It didn't mention my father's death or my depression or the hospitalization. It just painted me as someone who had stopped caring about her job. I should have been crushed, and I was. But I was also angry. Here's something you should know about being fired for depression. It's illegal in most states. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects employees who have mental health conditions, as long as they're able to perform the essential functions of their job with reasonable accommodations. But able to perform doesn't mean perform at the same level as before, and reasonable accommodations are open to interpretation by employers. I knew this because I'd worked in HR for a previous employer and I'd taken courses on employment law. More importantly, I knew that Miranda knew it too. Riverside Tech had a written policy about mental health accommodations, and I had documentation of every conversation where I'd asked for those accommodations and been told no. But here's what I didn't know until I started digging deeper. Riverside Tech wasn't just violating employment law. They were violating the Morrison contract in ways that would make any reasonable business owner want to run and hide. Here's what I discovered in the first week after being fired. The Morrison client was never really gone. Miranda had told me they lost the account, but in reality, Morrison had fired Riverside Tech for breach of contract. The breach wasn't just about my absence during the campaign kickoff. It was about Riverside Tech's failure to deliver promise services, their inflated billings, and their unprofessional behavior toward Morrison's team. Miranda had been lying about revenue numbers. A former team member named Jessica, who had left Riverside Tech the previous month after being told her position was being restructured, reached out to me. Jessica told me that Miranda had been inflating our department's revenue numbers for the past year by counting campaign proposals as completed work. When clients asked for their money back because they weren't satisfied with results, Miranda would mark them as delinquent accounts and exclude them from our quarterly reports. Riverside Tech was operating under false pretenses. Miranda marketed herself as a mental health advocate who understood the challenges working mothers faced. She had been featured in articles about supporting employees through difficult life events. She had a daughter who attended private school, and Miranda would tell clients that she understood the importance of work-life balance because she was a mother too. Jessica told me that Miranda's daughter actually lived with Miranda's ex-husband full-time, and Miranda only saw her on weekends. Miranda was single and had no idea what it was like to be a working mother. She was literally cosplaying as someone who understood the challenges her employees faced. The company was using subcontractors illegally. Riverside Tech had a habit of hiring full-time employees as independent contractors to avoid providing benefits and paying employment taxes. When these contractors inevitably struggled with the lack of job security and benefits, Miranda would terminate their contracts and hire new people, creating a pattern of high turnover that the company used as evidence that they couldn't find good talent. This wasn't just bad management, this was systematic fraud. I spent the next month gathering evidence. I contacted former colleagues who had left under similar circumstances. I reached out to clients who had worked with Riverside Tech and asked about their experiences. I researched Miranda's background and discovered that she had been fired from her previous job for ethical concerns related to falsifying client reports. Most importantly, I documented everything. I had email chains where Miranda explicitly refused to provide reasonable accommodations for my depression. I had performance reviews that praised my work while simultaneously citing me for missing targets that were impossible to meet. I had medical documentation of my hospitalization and therapy sessions. I had witness statements from colleagues who had seen Miranda's favoritism and discriminatory behavior. But the real smoking gun was in Riverside Tech's financial records. Remember those delinquent accounts I mentioned? They weren't just written off as bad debt. Miranda had been using them to inflate the company's financial performance. When Riverside Tech applied for a $3 million line of credit from First National Bank in September 2024, they presented those inflated numbers as evidence of strong revenue growth. The bank approved the line of credit based on false financial statements. If the truth came out, Riverside Tech would be liable for fraud, and Miranda would lose her ability to ever borrow money again. But here's the thing about fraud. It only works if no one is looking closely. The moment you start asking questions, the whole house of cards starts to collapse. My first move wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lawsuit or a viral social media campaign. It was simple and elegant and devastatingly effective. I left reviews. I left reviews on Glassdoor, Indeed, LinkedIn, and every other platform where current and former employees could share their experiences at Riverside Tech. I didn't name Miranda specifically, but I didn't need to. The reviews painted a picture of a toxic workplace culture that punished employees for having health issues, that promoted people based on personal relationships rather than merit, and that systematically underpaid and overworked staff. Here's what I wrote in my Glassdoor review. Riverside Tech presents itself as a progressive company that values work-life balance and mental health support. This could not be further from the truth. The company culture is toxic, with management that discriminates against employees who have health issues or family responsibilities. I was fired for missing work due to depression and a family medical emergency, despite requesting reasonable accommodations that were explicitly outlined in company policy. Miranda Thompson, the VP of Marketing, creates a culture of fear where employees are afraid to take sick days or request flexibility. The company's promotion practices are based on personal relationships rather than merit, and turnover is extremely high. Potential employees should be aware that this company's commitment to mental health and work-life balance exists only in their marketing materials, not in their actual practices. The review went viral within Riverside Tech's network. Current employees started sharing their own stories in the comments. Former employees started reaching out to me privately. One woman told me she had been fired for having a miscarriage and needed emergency surgery. Another man said he had been told to toughen up when he requested time off after his wife was diagnosed with cancer. Within a week, Riverside Tech's Glassdoor rating had dropped from 4.2 stars to 2.1 stars. The company couldn't delete the reviews fast enough, and each attempt to silence negative feedback only made more people angry. But the real damage wasn't in the ratings. It was in the credibility. Miranda tried to fight back. She posted a response to my Glassdoor review that was simultaneously defensive and accusatory. She accused me of being difficult to work with and unprofessional, and she suggested that my negative review was motivated by revenge rather than truth. That was a mistake. Her response confirmed everything I had said about the toxic culture. It showed that management reacted to criticism by attacking the messenger rather than addressing the actual issues. It proved that Riverside Tech was willing to publicly shame employees who dared to speak out about workplace problems. The response went viral for all the wrong reasons. People started sharing screenshots of Miranda's reply on social media with captions like, "This is why we need employee protection laws," and "This is what happens when toxic management gets called out." Within 2 weeks, 3 more employees had left Riverside Tech. One quit with no notice. Another requested immediate transfer to a different department. The third filed a formal complaint with HR about hostile workplace conditions that led to an investigation. But the worst was yet to come. Remember that $3 million line of credit that Riverside Tech had secured based on their inflated financial statements? First National Bank had a clause in their loan agreement that allowed them to call in the debt if the company's financial condition changed materially. False financial statements qualified as a material change. The call from First National Bank came on a Tuesday morning in February. I found out about it from Jessica, who still had friends at Riverside Tech. "Sarah, you need to know what's happening," Jessica said on the phone. "Miranda is in crisis mode. First National Bank is calling in the line of credit, and they want their money back immediately." "Why would they do that?" I asked, even though I had a pretty good idea. because they found out about the financial irregularities. Apparently, someone from the bank called Riverside Tech to discuss quarterly performance, and they noticed that the numbers didn't match what had been presented during the loan application process. They're demanding immediate repayment of the entire $3 million. I hung up the phone and called another former colleague, Marcus, who worked in Riverside Tech's accounting department. He confirmed what Jessica had told me. "It's worse than you think," Marcus said. "The bank is claiming fraud. They have forensic accountants looking at everything now, and Miranda is in panic mode. She's been in meetings with the CEO all morning, and I heard her screaming about disloyal employees and sabotage." Sabotage? Sarah, she thinks you did this intentionally. She thinks you found out about the financial issues and decided to destroy the company. I almost laughed. "Marcus, I didn't know anything about the financial fraud until after I was fired. I just wanted to warn other people about what kind of workplace Riverside Tech really is." "I know that, but Miranda doesn't. She's convinced that this is some elaborate revenge plot you orchestrated." Which, honestly, wasn't that far from the truth. I hadn't orchestrated the financial fraud, that was Miranda's own doing, but I had definitely played a role in exposing it. The thing about fraud is that it's not just illegal, it's unstable. Once you start lying about one thing, you have to lie about everything else. And the more lies you tell, the harder it becomes to keep track of them all. The forensic accountants found problems everywhere. Revenue numbers that didn't match bank deposits. Expenses that were marked as consulting fees, but were actually personal purchases. Travel reimbursements for trips that never happened. Client payments that were recorded as received, but were actually in dispute. By the end of February, Riverside Tech was facing not just the $3 million line of credit demand, but a potential securities fraud investigation from the SEC, multiple wrongful termination lawsuits from former employees, and a class action lawsuit from contractors who had been misclassified as independent contractors. Miranda's world was collapsing. The final blow came in the form of a lawsuit that I didn't even file. Dr. Amanda Foster, a former Riverside Tech employee who had been terminated for performance issues after developing diabetes, reached out to me in late February. She had been documenting workplace discrimination at Riverside Tech for months, and she had enough evidence to file a class action lawsuit. "The thing is, Sarah," Dr. Foster said when we met for coffee, "your story is just the tip of the iceberg. Miranda has been discriminating against employees with health issues for years. I've been in touch with 16 other former employees who were fired or constructively discharged for medical conditions. We have a pattern of behavior that could result in millions of dollars in damages. You want me to be part of this lawsuit? I want you to be the lead plaintiff. Your story is the most compelling, and you have the most documentation. We could put Miranda Thompson out of business permanently." I thought about it for a week. I thought about Emma and how she deserved a mother who was strong enough to fight back against workplace discrimination. I thought about all the other employees who had been hurt by Miranda's behavior. I thought about how Miranda had tried to destroy my career and my sense of self-worth. On March 1st, 2025, Dr. Foster filed the lawsuit. The complaint was 57 pages long and included detailed allegations of systematic discrimination against employees with disabilities, falsification of financial records, illegal employment practices, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It named Miranda Thompson personally, along with Riverside Tech, Incares, and several other executives who had been complicit in the company's illegal practices. The lawsuit asked for $12 million in damages, plus attorney fees and costs. It also requested that Miranda be barred from ever holding a position of authority in any company again. Miranda tried to ignore the lawsuit at first. She issued a statement to the press calling the allegations frivolous and baseless, and claiming that Riverside Tech was a family-friendly workplace that supports all employees. That statement backfired spectacularly. Within hours of its release, former employees had provided the local media with documentation contradicting every claim Miranda made. The newspaper ran a feature story titled Inside Riverside Tech, how a tech company discriminated against its most vulnerable employees, that included screenshots of internal emails, performance reviews, and witness statements. The TV news stations picked up the story. The local business journal ran a detailed exposé on Miranda's background, including her termination from her previous job for ethical violations. Social media exploded with stories from other employees who had been discriminated against by Miranda. The SEC opened an investigation. The Department of Labor started looking into the company's employment practices. The City Council began hearings on proposed legislation to strengthen worker protection laws. Riverside Tech was finished. Miranda called me on March 15, 2025, 6 months to the day after she had fired me. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said. She sounded exhausted. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I replied. "Please, I'm begging you, just hear me out." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. I wanted to see what she would say for herself. Miranda looked terrible. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had clearly lost weight. The confident, polished executive who had fired me 6 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "I know you think I wronged you," she said without preamble. "And maybe I did. But this has gone too far. You've destroyed my life. You've destroyed everything I've worked for." "You're right about one thing," I said. "You've destroyed everything you've worked for, but it wasn't me. It was your own lies, your own greed, your own inability to treat your employees like human beings. I gave you every opportunity to succeed. I promoted you. I trusted you. And when you couldn't handle the workload, I tried to work with you. No, you didn't. When I asked for reasonable accommodations for my depression, you said the company policy was too complicated. When I needed time to deal with my father's death, you made me feel like a burden. When I was hospitalized for a suicide attempt, you fired me for being unreliable. Those weren't my decisions. Those were company policies. Those were your decisions. You're the vice president of marketing. You're responsible for how your team is treated, and you made the choice to discriminate against me because of my mental health condition." Miranda leaned forward, her eyes filling with tears. "Sarah, I'm begging you. Drop the lawsuit, walk away. I'll give you a reference. I'll write you a recommendation letter. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't destroy my company." I looked at her. This woman who had made my life hell for 6 months, who had fired me when I was most vulnerable, who had lied to my face about company policies while systematically discriminating against disabled employees. And I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. "Miranda," I said quietly, "I'm not destroying your company. You did that all by yourself. All I did was tell the truth." That coffee shop meeting wasn't the end of Miranda's problems. It was just the beginning. The class action lawsuit filed by Dr. Foster moved forward with lightning speed. Within 2 weeks, 17 more former employees had joined as plaintiffs, each with their own story of discrimination, retaliation, and mistreatment. The total damages claim grew to $24 million. But Miranda's problems weren't just legal, they were financial, professional, and personal. Remember that $3 million line of credit that First National Bank had called in? Miranda had to liquidate her personal assets to cover it. Her house went on the market in April. Her car was repossessed in May. Her daughter's private school sent a letter asking about tuition payments that suddenly seemed uncertain. The SEC investigation uncovered evidence of securities fraud that went far beyond the initial loan application. Miranda had been inflating revenue numbers for 3 years, using them to justify executive bonuses that should never have been paid. The SEC recommended criminal charges. The Department of Labor investigation found that Riverside Tech had systematically misclassified employees to avoid paying benefits and employment taxes. The company faced back taxes, penalties, and interest that exceeded $1.2 million. The City Council hearings led to new legislation that required companies to provide reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities and made it easier for workers to file discrimination complaints. Miranda's name was repeatedly mentioned in council meetings as an example of why such laws were necessary. By May 2025, Riverside Tech was no longer a functioning company. The SEC had placed it under investigation, the Department of Labor had frozen its assets, and the Department of Justice had initiated criminal proceedings against Miranda and several other executives. Miranda herself was facing 3 felony charges: securities fraud, false statements to a financial institution, and conspiracy to violate employment laws. Each charge carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. But the most satisfying moment came in June 2025, when the class action lawsuit finally went to trial. I was the first witness called to the stand. For 3 days, I testified about Miranda's discriminatory behavior, about the company's fake mental health policies, about how I had been fired for seeking reasonable accommodations for my depression. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Miranda Thompson liable for intentional discrimination, fraudulent misrepresentation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They awarded the 18 plaintiffs $32 million in damages, plus attorney fees and costs. $32 million. The news coverage was relentless. Local stations ran stories titled, "Tech Executive Gets Prison Sentence for Discrimination." National business journals wrote articles about how one employee's lawsuit destroyed a company. The employment law community cited Riverside Tech as an example of why strong worker protections were necessary. Miranda was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. She was also permanently barred from holding any position of authority in a public company and was required to pay restitution to every former employee she had discriminated against. While Miranda was being processed into the federal prison system, I was sitting in my own office, my new consulting firm, watching my business grow. I'd started Chen Digital Consulting in April 2025, just as the Riverside Tech story was breaking. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd spent 6 months gathering evidence and building a case, but I'd also been developing a business plan for my own company. Former colleagues started reaching out almost immediately. They wanted to work with someone who had stood up to workplace discrimination, who had proven that it was possible to fight back against toxic management. Dr. Foster joined my company as a senior consultant. Marcus from accounting came on as my CFO. Jessica became my head of operations. By July 2025, Chen Digital Consulting had 12 employees and was handling $2.3 million in annual contracts. We specialized in helping small and medium-sized businesses navigate employment law compliance, implement mental health support programs, and create genuinely inclusive workplace cultures. The irony wasn't lost on me. Miranda had fired me for struggling with depression, and now I was helping other companies support employees with mental health conditions. But the real victory wasn't in the business success. It was in the change I had helped create. The Riverside Tech case became a landmark employment law decision. Courts across the country started using it as precedent in disability discrimination cases. Legislators referenced it when drafting new worker protection laws. HR departments updated their policies to avoid the same mistakes Miranda had made. More importantly, other employees started coming forward with their own stories of workplace discrimination. The floodgates had opened, and companies could no longer get away with treating their workers as disposable. I received letters from employees all over the country who had been inspired by my story. A teacher in California who had been fired for having cancer reached out to tell me that she had filed her own lawsuit. A construction worker in Texas who had been terminated for asking for accommodations after losing his arm wrote to thank me for giving him courage to fight back. These weren't just individual victories, they represented a fundamental shift in how American workers viewed their rights and their ability to seek justice. Looking back on this entire experience, I think about a lot of things. I think about how one moment of discrimination can change the course of multiple lives. I think about how Miranda believed she was untouchable, that she could treat her employees however she wanted because she controlled their livelihoods. But mostly I think about resilience. I think about how the human spirit finds a way to fight back, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Depression nearly destroyed me. Being fired made me feel like a failure as a mother and as a professional. Watching Miranda get away with lying and discrimination made me doubt whether justice existed in the world. But sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually invitations to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. I never wanted to be a whistleblower. I never wanted to file lawsuits or fight legal battles. I just wanted to do my job, take care of my daughter, and live a quiet life. But when Miranda fired me, she didn't just end my career at Riverside Tech. She handed me the evidence I needed to hold her accountable for years of discrimination and fraud. She gave me the platform to help other workers understand their rights. She provided me with the motivation to start my own company and build something better. The irony is perfect. Miranda destroyed my career at Riverside Tech, and that destruction became the foundation for my success at Chen Digital Consulting. But the real victory isn't in the money I made or the company I built. It's in the change we created. It's in the workers who now know they don't have to tolerate discrimination. It's in the companies that have updated their policies to actually support their employees. It's in the legal precedents that make it harder for employers to get away with treating people as disposable. Justice isn't always swift, it's not always fair, and it's not always perfect. But sometimes it is both sweet and complete. If this story gave you chills and reminded you that justice isn't a myth, smash that like button right now and let me know in the comments. What's your take on workplace discrimination? Have you ever been treated unfairly by a boss or employer? And most importantly, what would you do if someone tried to destroy your career the way Miranda tried to destroy mine? If you enjoyed this story of real revenge and workplace justice, you'll love these other videos I've done. Click here to watch how I turn my termination into a multi-million-dollar business empire. Click here for the story of the CEO who fired me and ended up in federal prison. And of course, subscribe to this channel for more stories about real people fighting back against workplace injustice. Because justice isn't something that just happens to other people. Sometimes, with the right evidence and the right strategy, we can make it happen ourselves. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.